Alright, so we've been talking a lot about the Montreal Canadiens and the first overall pick, Shane Wright. Not Shane Wright, who really knows? It's gonna be Shane Wright. And I do think there are some good conversations that we can continue to have about prospects, young guys, etc. But there are some more conversations we can also have about players that could join the Canadiens, but who don't happen to be first overall franchise potential forwards. Let's go over onto an article by Marco D'Amico on Montreal Hockey Now, talking about defensemen that the Canadiens could target this summer who happen to be veterans. This article was published on the 19th, so last week. I will leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and read, because I wanted to take some snippets from this piece and use it to get some conversation going on this channel, because I do like the ideas that D'Amico goes out there and presents. So, the article is pretty explanatory based off of its title. He talks about a potential Jeff Petrie trade and whether or not the Canadiens could find a guy to replace what it is that Petrie is able to provide. The entire first few paragraphs go over Petrie and how it would leave Joel Edvinsson and David Savard as the only true veterans on the club, because you gotta remember, okay, Shea Weber, he is out, he's likely going to get traded too. Chris Letang is a veteran, but he is so expensive, you're probably not going to be able to get that guy. And so, are there any other right-handed defensemen that happen to have a sizable amount of NHL experience that could head over to Montreal in free agency? These are the names that D'Amico goes out there and talks about. The first one he brings up is Anton Stralman, a guy who actually is a pretty interesting name that has been on the more polarizing side of the coin. Stralman was making $5.5 million this season. He was making $5.5 ever since 2019-20. Before that, though, in 2014-15, he had started off a $4.5 million AAV contract, which went on for 5 years. While Anton Stralman was playing the Tampa Bay Lightning system and he was actually producing pretty well, 39 points in 82 games played, he was never really a Victor Hedman #1 offensive defenseman type. He was always just a middle-of-the-pack, defensively responsible guy, whom, if you got points from, it would be a nice bonus, but you really just expected him to do the right thing in his own zone, make life very difficult for the opponents, and make some good shutdown defensive reads as well. He did just that in Tampa and Florida. However, you could say that the last season he had in Florida was a lot more tainted due to his contract, which is why he eventually got traded to the Arizona Coyotes. Now, this recent season he put up 23 points in 74 games. He was a -16, so that's really not great, but of course, you know, he's playing in Arizona. You can't go out there and expect a lot more out of a player in those circumstances, but he was making $5.5 million, and he is 35 years old. It's not really likely that the Arizona Coyotes are going to go out there and re-sign this player, which is why D'Amico goes out there and writes this about the Super Swede. Stralman would be exactly what the doctor ordered for the Canadiens, as he can still play upwards of 20 minutes a game while providing excellent guidance and leadership to the emerging youngsters in the organization. The soon-to-be 36-year-old would likely have to look to a short-term contract, and he should not be used in top offensive situations, leaving that role to younger players like Barron or Jordan Harris to further their development. He projects a potential 1 or 2 year deal in the $2 to $2.75 million range for Stralman to close out his career with the Montreal Canadiens. Now, while D'Amico is writing this, he's not necessarily saying, oh, the Canadiens are going to go out there and they're going to try to get this done because they're linked to the guy and they're going to make a signing. He's just speculating as to what a potential contract could look like for Stralman because, I mean, he is old. He is not going to have a long time left in the NHL. So whatever the contract that he signs is going to be, this is around the territory we could probably see him lie within. And the Montreal Canadiens, I mean, this is a team that will likely have themselves some salary cap space to burn with a Shea Weber trade, with a Jeff Petrie trade, maybe with some other trades as well. Who really knows? So Stralman's a guy that I honestly would be somewhat on board with. He is only 5'11", though, so you are kind of losing out on a little bit of size if you're trading away Petrie and getting a Stralman in return. But size hasn't stopped Stralman from being an effective NHL defender in the past, therefore I do still see some value in his overall profile. D'Amico goes out there and writes about yet another player who has happened to play in Tampa as well. Next up on the list, he talks about Jan Rutta, who is a name that I've come to like over the past few years and a bit. Rutta is 31 years old, which is kind of mind-blowing to me because I always kind of saw him as a newer NHL player, and thus, in my mind, I subconsciously linked him to the idea of him being a younger guy. But no, Jan Rutta is 31 years old. He's turning 32 in July. He's 6'3", 201 as a right-handed defenseman as well. His $1.3 million AAV contract expires this season after it had been going on for the past 3 years. And you have yourselves a player that has just come off of winning 2 Stanley Cup rings. I mean, yeah, that's pretty good, isn't it? In the 2020 bubble, he didn't play the entire run up until the end, where he actually suited up for several games against the Dallas Stars. The season after that, though, he played 23 games as they went to the Stanley Cup Finals against Montreal, so right away there's some bad blood that I think a lot of Canadiens fans might automatically insert into the situation. This season, he's played 3 games in the postseason, however, he has had 0 points. He had 18 points with the regular Lightning as well in the regular season. Good for him getting those numbers up there on the board. And on Rutta, D'Amico writes in his article, he has been a consistent member of a championship-winning Tampa Bay Lightning squad over the last couple of seasons, and he could bring that championship pedigree to the Canadiens. The soon-to-be 32-year-old has experience playing in all situations and may simply be priced out of Tampa Bay's salary structure in favor of cheaper alternatives like Cal Foote. Rutta could provide the Canadiens with a solid stopgap on the right side of their defense, all while being able to contribute to the success of their transition. He would likely be looking at a 2 or 3 year deal with a bump in salary from his current $1.3 million contract, but he would be worth every penny. Now, as I said, I have indeed been a pretty big fan of Rutta and his play the past few years, especially when we were doing the streams for the Lightning against the Dallas Stars. We were starting to stream a lot during that 2020 bubble playoffs, right? And watching the series of the Islanders versus the Lightning and seeing how they were playing, etc., etc., eventually it got to a point where we saw Tampa and Dallas play off against each other, and that's really when Rutta made his impact known. He entered the lineup, and he honestly did not look out of place. Even though he had missed 2 rounds worth of play with the Tampa Bay Lightning, he came back in, played in the finals, and he was more than okay. So I definitely was a big fan watching him in that postseason run, and then the next season when we also did the streams for the Lightning and the Canadiens, etc., we still saw him play the right way. So again, maybe there are some Canadiens fans that would say, no, we don't want to get this guy. He was on the team that defeated us in the finals. Why do we want to do that? Well, the Habs kind of do have some depth they will need to fill, assuming Jeff Petrie gets traded, etc., etc. So maybe a veteran player like a Rutta or a Stralman should be the subject of the Canadian sites. There are indeed some other names that are mentioned in this piece. D'Amico goes out there and talks about Chris Weidman. He talks about Justin Braun as well, but I only really wanted to focus on the first 2 here because I like these 2 the most out of the other ones. Obviously, Chris Weidman, of course. He was an honestly pretty alright player for the Canadiens considering the contract that he did have, but as the article states, there might be some desire on his end to actually chase a little bit of the bag considering the body of work that he did do with the Montreal Canadiens. So who really knows if he's even going to want to come back to Montreal, but if he does, I don't think that would be a bad decision either. Justin Braun, on the other hand, I don't really think he's that good. We saw him playing for the New York Rangers against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Oh boy, what a bad series that was for him. Talk to me in the comments though all your thoughts about some of these names. Of course, we only really talked in detail about Rutta and Stralman. The article will be linked in the description if you want to go ahead and see what D'Amico has to say about Chris Weidman and Justin Braun as well. But either way, talk to me in the comments. What do you think about the Canadiens and their right side defense? Should they trade a Jeff Petrie-like player? Do you think a veteran presence is something that the Canadiens could look for and actually target in the offseason via free agency or a trade itself? If it's not Rutta or not Stralman that you're interested in, then hey, who else is on your radar? Who else do you think the Montreal Canadiens would, could, or should see value in heading into the 2022-2023 season? Talk to me in the comments, all your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.